Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to today's webinar entitled Revenues, Scalability and Replicability for Nature Outcomes, 5 Lessons for Policymakers and Investors. My name is Tom Williams and I'm an Associate Director at the Green Finance Institute, and I will be your host and moderator for this session, which is part of the public-private community of practice on nature and development finance series under the Revenues for Nature initiative. And I think this is webinar number 5 of the series, and you can catch up on the previous webinars on our YouTube channel. More about that later. This series brings together public and private sector leaders committed to work and align investment strategies with government-led national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs as you'll probably commonly recognize them, ultimately contributing to the achievement of Target 19 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is all about resource mobilization for nature. For today's session, we will explore how credible revenue pathways can accelerate nature-positive investment and advance national delivery of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We have a good number of people on the webinar today, and it will be great for you to know who else is in the room. So if you could take a moment, please do go to the chat function, share your name, your organization, and your country, so we can get a sense of who's in the room. And on the next slide, I just want to cover off some quick housekeeping. We do have simultaneous interpretation available in French and Spanish, and of course we have English. Thank you for the interpretation team for being with us today. To activate interpretation, just click on the globe icon, which you should see at the bottom of the screen. And if you can't see it directly, go to the more dots and you should be able to see the globe icon. Click on that, select your preferred language, and you can change your language if you so wish throughout the webinar. If you want to follow the English session, then please select the English language button. If you have any technical issues that need help, please do send a private Zoom message to my colleague Alexis. So have a flick down the participants list and you should see Alexis. So if you have any technical issues, Alexis is there to help you. And then finally, we are recording this webinar and it will be available on the YouTube page, as I mentioned earlier, with the other webinars that we've staged in this series. And we'll also circulate a link to that recording by email, probably early next week. Okay, on to our agenda for today. Once I have got through this introduction, I'll give you an overview of some of the key lessons learned from the case studies that we've been publishing within the Revenues for Nature project over the last 15 to 18 months or so. We'll then move on to 3 case studies that will outline some of the enabling conditions for success and look at blended finance and de-risking structures, technical assistance and small grant windows, standardized MRV, governance frameworks, project design, and models that embed strong community participation and benefit sharing, among other topics. So some really rich case studies that we're going to present that will touch on some of those key issues. We'll then have a question and answer section of the webinar at the end, where we can go back to the speakers and put your questions to them. Please do feel free again to use the chat function to put any questions in, and I will work my way through them. And when we get to the Q&A, I can put those to the panelists. And then we'll close up with a bit of a preview of the Revenues for Nature programme in 2026. I won't go through this in too much detail, but hopefully just gives you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish with this particular session, trying to give some insight in terms of what credible revenue pathways look like, particularly in support of NBSAP delivery. We'll dive into some of the specific revenue models and particularly exploring some of those enabling issues that I mentioned earlier, looking at how certain models measure outcomes, whether they're environmental outcomes or financial outcomes, particularly in terms of attracting investment. And then lastly, looking at some of the very specific financial instruments and tools that are used for de-risking, and also look at some of the technical assistance programs that these models have. So hopefully, as we work our way through the case studies, the lessons learned, and the Q&A, we'll touch on many of these different objectives that you can work with as you go away. On to the next slide. So just to kick things off and really, I guess, to frame some of the deep dives into the case studies that we will hear about later. Over the last 15 months or so with Revenues for Nature, we've identified more than 50 examples, which we have on our global database of various different nature-based revenue models. And on the next few slides, I want to give you a sense of the scope and breadth of these case studies. So having a look at the next slide, you'll see that we have a good mix across various ecosystems, with agriculture and land use, forests and marine and freshwater being the most prevalent. And as well as looking at specific revenue models, such as payment for ecosystem services, biodiversity and water quality credits, for example, we also have case studies that focus on funds, so blended finance facilities, water funds, and also bonds and other financial instruments. And that's really a recognition that the deployment of some of the revenue models that we have case studies on can really be effectively supported by some of these dedicated funds and financial instruments. On the next slide, you'll see geographically where we have pulled some of these case studies from. So we've got good spread across different regions, and also a number of models that are global in their scope and or not necessarily defined by geographical borders. And then finally, on the next slide, looking at the type of habitats that the models focus on, again, a good range, and no surprise that a good deal of them focus on productive or modified landscapes, which tend to have sustained economic activity associated with them, which creates the right economic incentives for revenue models to succeed. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for the type of revenue models we have in our database, and entices you to go and have a look. Just Google Revenues for Nature case studies and you should get straight to the database. So moving on to sort of more substantively what we have been learning collectively from these case studies, and a few things that are emerging, and really just picking out 5 key features here, which I think we'll also dive into when we get into some of the case studies presentations later. The first one, design financial models that integrate nature and social outcomes with investor returns while directly addressing risk as a systemic barrier to investment. Quite a bit to unpack on this one. You know, the first part is really about the coupling of improving a public good, such as flood protection, for example, with enhancing the value of a private good, which could be real estate. So it's ensuring that environmental and social outcomes demonstrably reduce costs or enhance revenue streams that generate investor returns. On the risk piece, which also speaks to the second lessons learned there about blended finance, we've seen a number of the case studies use blended finance facilities to de-risk investments and attract senior financing. You know, first loss facilities, guarantees, anchor funding, and concession tranches all help to overcome early stage risk and move projects from concept to commercial readiness. These tools continue to be a key bridge from pilot projects to scalable investment opportunities. And that sort of feeds into the third lesson learned around the deployment of small grants as catalytic investment multipliers. What we've learned is relatively modest grants can unlock significant private finance flows by funding some of the early stage work, some of the preparatory work. So this could be baseline data collection, setting up your MRV, setting up benefit sharing arrangements or community arrangements. You know, these are really critical elements that build the credibility needed for investors to enter at a later stage. Through our implementation partners at Revenues for Nature, we've supported 7 models to replicate in new markets, and funding as little as $50,000 has helped those to unlock hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, millions of private finance. The fourth one then is around standardized frameworks, MRV systems and governance structures. You know, having clear auditable standards really helps to reduce transaction costs. It improves due diligence efficiency, and it enables models to scale across multiple jurisdictions. So strong governance and transparent benefit sharing also ensure integrity and long-term viability of some of the models that we have looked at through our case studies. And finally, governance, community participation, and fair benefit sharing. Investor interest is increasingly depending on social integrity. And what we are finding is that models that embed community co-design, transparent benefit sharing, and strong governance are much better positioned to manage social risk and deliver long-term durable outcomes. So hopefully that just gives you a high-level overview of some of the common themes that have been emerging from the case studies. We will be publishing a lessons learned document in the new year that will include these lessons learned and some others. So do look out for that publication. In the meantime, do check out our case study database, and I am sure we'll hear more about some of these lessons during the following presentations. Okay, so on to our case study presentations, and the first one I would like to introduce is Gabriela. Gabriela is a sustainability manager at Natura. Natura, as many of you may know, is a leading Brazilian cosmetics and personal care company, and Gabriela is going to present the Living Amazon mechanism. So Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. So yes, I will present the first case study. And as Tom said, Natura is a Brazilian leading company in the cosmetics sector. And Natura has 25 years of experience working with communities in the Amazon. So we buy cocoa, we buy açaí, we buy cupuaçu butter, or cupuaçu, the ingredient to actually produce the butter, and many others from these communities. And we have the direct relationship with the cooperatives and associations. And this has been happening over the past 25 years. So I think we can start the presentation with the next slide, please, and the next one. And just to give you an idea, Natura has been working and partnering with these communities for these 25 years, and we have paid attention to recurrent needs and recurrent barriers that these cooperatives of family farmers and plant extractivists have faced over the years. And this is the initial idea, the initial concept of creating a mechanism, a blended finance instrument to address these needs. And the thinking was precisely that we need to bring other stakeholders. We need to make these investments together because everyone benefits from it, and you have more strength if you address these issues together. So in 2018, Natura started developing this concept, and in 2022, we joined forces with Fumbio, the Brazilian Biodiversity Fund that some of you might know, and also Vert Securitization, which is a company that works as a financial intermediary in Brazil. And we conceived together the Living Amazon mechanism, and it's a blended finance instrument. There is a guidebook, right, Tom, from the GFI and from Revenue for Nature initiative addressing and detailing, so you can find more information there. It was published this year. But basically, the basic idea is really to address the issue of credit, because many of these communities, being community business organizations, they have difficulties to access credit to finance their annual crops, and other recurrent needs that they had, addressing barrier from genders to youth participation, but also strengthening the cooperatives and also strengthening their productivity. So working in the field to enhance practice and so on. So we developed this model, and this diagram shows exactly the structure, in which Vert is the manager for the credit vehicle, and Fumbio is the manager for the philanthropic vehicle. So here we make non-reimbursable investments, and in the credit, the cooperatives have the credit to finance their annual crops. So basically, this is the structure. Natura is an investor in the philanthropic investment vehicle and also in the credit vehicle, and also purchase the input in the end. So they have annual financing, and in the end, Natura pays them, and they can repay the financial intermediary event. We launched the initiative 2 years ago. So now we have the proof of concept that it works. And it was not conceived to be only Natura's supply chain accessing, but actually bringing other off-takers and financing other supply chains. The next slide, please. And here we have the results. So we have the proof of concept is going to end the first round, the first 3 years next year, but is working. And I think this is the main achievement, is that we managed to bring other investors on board. The latest one is Jeff, which joined recently the credit vehicle. And it's very important because we, as Tom was saying, we can demonstrate that if you blend the different capitals, you can have an impact and strengthen this community business and these supply chains. So the cooperatives already paid once, paid twice, and they are taking credit now between now and January, the next round of credit. And they have been receiving the support also from the Technical Assistance Facility, the Philanthropic Fund. And here I wanted just to give one clear example of the importance of blending these different capitals, because what they chose to have the first kind of support from the technical assistance, the communities, and already highlights the importance of having this shared governance structure, that we have the participation of the local communities, is that they chose to have financial management capacity building. So that was very important, because this also has an impact on the results of the credit vehicle. And we have very good results. We have 0 default in these first 2 years, and we know the importance of having this financial management over these 2 years. And it's not only a training, but actually tailored to every different cooperatives and their needs, and having weekly meetings to see how their financial routines are structured. So this is one example. And the other, of course, is actually bringing this funding, for example, from Jeff and also from IFC. This helps to the risk for commercial investors in the future, and also support in general that we can have blended finance. It means that you pay the senior quota, but you also have the tranche of mezzanine or subordinated, and they are actually having the risk mechanism for that. And this supports in the sense that we can have affordable interest rates, because if it was only commercial capital for these communities, in the end, we wouldn't have an affordable interest rate, which is not commercial, which is not completely subsidized, but it is somewhere in between. So next slide. Here is the coverage area. As I said, we have a 0% default rate, and we are aiming to keep it very low. But we are also preparing for this second phase, the expansion to other supply chains. So we are understanding how we are going to expand and bring other players. And this also is important, because we want to bring other players and expand this impact to other supply chains. So this is also mobilization of private capital, in the sense that we want to bring other off-takers, especially for the philanthropic vehicle, because they also are going to benefit, and their supply chains also benefit from having strengthened supply chains. Next slide, please. Here are the lines of investments that we have in the philanthropic vehicle. As I mentioned here, institutional strengthening is the financial management, but we are also supporting them to improve their structures in the cooperatives, so that they have better factories, the ones that have small factories. So this is also in line with environmental social performance. We are also testing the investment in agroforestry systems, so this also enhance that they can sell these products to the cosmetic industry in this case, but also to others. We are also investing in gender. So was a requirement also from Jeff to have a gender strategy, and we are working on that, and we have received very positive feedback. And we are also investing currently in youth, so building capacity so that they see opportunities to continue this work and having opportunities to stay in rural areas. So next slide, please. I'm finishing. I just wanted to focus on this. This is the governance structure. And I think this is a key feature of the mechanism, because we do everything together with the communities. And Mauricio is going to speak later about the bank habitats in Colombia. Mauricio also has an experience working with the communities here of Natura in Brazil, because we're developing another project. And it's very important, this participatory approach. And I think this brings ownership. So when we see the community saying, like, this is our mechanism, for us is very important, because they have representatives on the board. We have continuous consultations with them, so ongoing consultations. And this is a key feature, because it's tailored to their needs. And we are also, I understand always when you think, we are also enhancing leadership, because we also bring them to speak with us. We had now the opportunities during COP30. So we had the youth participation in a panel to discuss their capacity building program. So they are very much involved. And this is also a way to enhance capacities and make this mechanism legitimate. So I think that's important, a structure that we have them sitting on the board and taking the decisions together with the investors, and informing the decision of the executive committee, which is made by Fumbio and Vert. Next and last slide. So as I said, I think it's very important, and I think also this participation, and we are considering this for the second phase, as I said, for other off-takers, what's their role? Is the mobilization, is investing in the philanthropic investment, is it investing in the credit vehicle? But the most important thing for us is that they take part, and they are also bringing human resources as investment and mobilizing these supply chains, because we think it's very important. Social bioeconomy, as we call it, because it's also with the social aspect in Brazil, is still relatively small. So we need actually to join these forces to strengthen the communities and make this have more presence and relevance. And this part of creating this virtual circle from credit to access to market, it's a key feature of this mechanism. And this can only be done if it's shaped together with the communities. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gabriela. And I think the Living Amazon mechanism is really a great example of a community-centered model, and not just ensuring community needs are met, but that they have ownership and they have agency. And it's great to see how the mechanism has and continues to grow in a pretty short period of time in terms of capital deployed and the impact it's having. As Gabriela mentioned, we have published a guidebook on the Living Amazon mechanism. So again, if you go to the Revenues for Nature website, you'll be able to find that. We have it in English, and we have it translated into Portuguese as well. If you have some questions for Gabriela, please put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to those questions in the panel discussion. So if you've got any questions for Gabriela, put those in the chat, and for any other speakers as well. So let's move on to our second case study. So this is Colombia Habitat Banking and Biodiversity Credits. And I'd like to introduce Mauricio, who is the Brazil country manager with Terrasos. So Mauricio, over to you.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for being here. I think we can jump on to the slides now. So nice to meet you, everyone. I'm, as Tom said, the Brazil country manager of Terrasos. What we do at Terrazos is that we create exceptional conservation projects in highly threatened ecosystems. Go to the next slide. So, just for everyone to know, Terrazos is a B Corp with more than 10 years of experience. We were born in Colombia, but now we have a LATAM like perspective, and we're also working in Africa and in other countries. Our experience lies in the offsetting world. So we started doing offsetting and environmental investments here in Colombia, as Colombia has a strong regulation for biodiversity offsets. And in that way, we brought in a mechanism to aggregate this compensations. So aggregate this in investments in nature. And we created a solution that was called Habitat Banks here in Colombia. It was the first solution that was aggregating offsets and investments to nature in Latin America. And in this way, we've been designing different tools and different mechanisms like biodiversity credits or biodiversity units in order to drive environmental innovation and in order to work with the communities, as Gabriel was saying, to have biodiversity gains, but also enhance the livelihood of these communities in time. So if we can go to the next slide. Terrazos right now is working in different countries. I'm not gonna stay here a lot, but as I tell, we started in Colombia and now we're working in different countries in Latin America, Africa, and probably Southeast Asia in the next couple of years. Go to the next slide, please. So what we do at Terrazos, and this is very important here, is that we deliver biodiversity outcomes. So our main customers are oil and gas, infrastructure, or energy industries that have impact in nature and that need to offset these impacts depending on each regulation and depending on the requirements of each country or the requirements of the investors or lenders of the money they have. And right now, as Gabriela said, we're working on different sectors. So companies that are leading sustainability practices in the world that want to engage with biodiversity within a transparent and traceable instrument like biodiversity credits. So in this way, we've been working in the last 3 years with agribusiness, with supply chain dependent companies, and also with companies that depend highly in ecological infrastructure, so depend highly on water or different environmental services in order to invest in nature and de-risk their value chain or their business models. So there's a sorry. So our business model allow us to partnership with different communities, with different investors, and with different stakeholders, as you see in the right. And I think what's important in this slide is that we can work with different levels of the value chain in order to deliver these biodiversity outcomes. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what we've encountered in this last 13 years is that many of the conservation initiatives that are put out there by companies or by organizations, even though they are really let's say, they come from good faith. They normally are short-term initiatives. They are dispersed interventions. That means that many companies are investing in small projects in different parts of the regions of the countries or where they work. They're not result oriented, so they're not a result-based mechanism. So the money is wasted, and we've encountered many of the projects that have been put out there that have been after 5 years, 7 years burned or abandoned because there's not a long-term financial mechanism that supports this project. So our solution, and we can go to the next slide. Our solution is called Habitat Banks, as Gabriela said. And in a nutshell, Habitat Banks aggregate investments both from the compliance and from the voluntary sectors or companies, organizations that want to engage with biodiversity. And this allows us to have early investment. So normally we have the IDB or other development banks investing in our projects. We can have the projects tied up to results, so performance-based mechanisms. We can secure land for more years, so at least 30 years. That's our projects, and we can reduce transactional costs and create economies of scales to deliver better biodiversity outcomes in the long term, both for biodiversity, for the companies that we're working with, and of course for the biodiversity custodians and communities that we work with. So at the end, a habitat bank, and we can go to the next slide. At the end, a habitat bank has three phases. So the first one is that we establish and we create the areas that are going to be within the projects. So we do technical and legal due diligence, and we create management and monitoring plans, and we estimate the number of credits. This is important because the estimation a priori of the project allow us to control to have a really good like financial plan in order to know how much credits we're gonna emit in the future, and to see how much investment we need and how much cost we need in the future. Second, the companies that need biodiversity offsets or that have biodiversity requirements purchase the credits, and we have certain formulas and certain ways to know how much credits each company needs to buy, and we create contracts that are based and that are tied up to results. So the companies only pay the project when the results are achieved, and at the end, the transactional unit is the TIBU, that is the Terrazos Biodiversity Unit, that is a biodiversity credit based on area that encapsulates all this methodology, the business model, but also the results in terms of biodiversity, social, and the returns in terms of biodiversity benefits that the company is having. If we can go to the next slide, one of the most interesting things in this business model is that we create a project that is financially sound for 30 years, in terms that we expect to sell all the credits, as you see in the graph, in the first 10, 15 years of the project. And for every credit that we sell, we allocate between 10 or 14% or 40% to a long-term sustainability account that's like a pension for nature that you see in the graph as a yellow graph. So this pension fund for nature will increase until we sell all of the credits, and then we will have the financial the financial security that the project will have the funds in order to operate for 30 years. This means money to pay the communities, money to pay for the monitoring, and money to pay for the project in the 30 years. So in this way, we secure the project financially for the 30 years. And we could go to the next slide, please. So there are many like partners involved, but in order to make it simple, we create this value chain, this lean value chain. So we are here in the left part of the graph, in the part of project developers. Then we have the auditors of the process. This is very important because they are the ones who are securing that this process is performance-based. So the auditors go and analyze if we have accomplished the milestones, both ecological and management milestones, that the project has to meet in order to emit the credits. Before the auditor hasn't evaluated the results in terms of milestones, the credits cannot be emitted. And the credits will be emitted either in the ministry, in the platform of the Ministry of Environment of the country. Colombia has one, but there's not many ministries of environment that has put in place a platform to register the credits. And we also have the registry platforms, so online registry platforms based on blockchain, that are the custodians of the credits and the custodians also of the information that cannot be replaced and that cannot be transformed in time. So this blockchain is really important in order to go to the sales channel that can be directly or through e-commerce. So the companies or so the companies can buy this biodiversity performance credits. And we can jump to the next slide. So right now we're working with two types of credits. So both are biodiversity credits, but we're working with two dimensions, let's say. So for the voluntary part of the credits, or the companies, we're working with 10 square meters. And for the compliance companies and the companies that have to offset their impacts, we're working with 1 hectare credits. This is important because this gets a sense on what the companies are buying depending on the market they are, and the willingness to pay also of companies depending on the market they are, if they have to comply or if this is merely voluntary credits. And we can go to the last slide, talking about the big question, who is buying these credits? So we've been working with different use cases of biodiversity units and credits to understand why companies and how companies are buying these credits. So in the top two lines, we have the regulatory or compliance kind of purchase, where companies buy these credits to offset their impacts, as I said. But also, we've been working, for example, with the IDB here in Colombia, with a mechanism that is a financial contractual requirement that is under the Performance Standard 6 of the IFC, where the lender of a big project obligates the company to invest additional money into nature in order to comply with the Performance Standard 6 of the IFC. So many companies, in order to comply with this contractual financial requirement, are buying biodiversity units in order to comply with their lender obligation. Other examples are, for example, the one that we're working with Natura that Gabi just told about how a company that depends on their sustainability of their value chain and on de-risking the value chain can actually invest in biodiversity outcomes through biodiversity credits in order to de-risk their value chain and in order to assure that the value chain will be producing the products they need in the long term. And also, to end my talk, we're working with a lot of companies as well that want to buy biodiversity credits in order to report under different standards. For example, TNFD, for example, GRI, or other standards that the company are working with. And this has been really important here in Colombia because leading sustainability companies are wanting to engage with biodiversity with a real asset that is transparent and traceable through time and that can deliver biodiversity outcomes in time. So I'm going to end there. I brought some slides to explain each of the use cases, but I think my time is over. So I'm going to pass it to you, Tom, so we can have a Q&A at the end.
Excellent, Maurizio. And yeah, lots of info in your slides, which we will share with everybody, so you can dig into those in your own time. We're really seeing real demand for these kinds of compensatory schemes, such as habitat banking, from a number of countries across the region. So I think it's a real growth market. And also starting to see for those systems that have been around for some time, like in the US, for example, I think it's currently worth about 4 billion a year in terms of the private capital it's mobilizing. So great potential for these kinds of schemes to be introduced all across the world. If you've got any questions for Maurizio, put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to those in the Q&A. But we have one more presentation before we get to the Q&A. So we're moving now from Latin America over to Asia. I'm delighted to welcome Ramita, who is the National Program Officer at UNDP Sri Lanka. And he's going to talk about payment for ecosystem services in Sri Lanka. Ramita, over to you. You're on mute, Ramita. There you go.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you for the opportunity provided, and it's good evening from Sri Lanka. And I would like to share some of the lessons we learned in promoting payment for ecosystem services. Even though that usually we think PES or payment for ecosystem services as a voluntary, conditional, direct compensation and promote conservation type of a instrument, we have an additional condition, or we had an additional dimension to the work we did, especially on the social outcomes, because we wanted to ensure that there will be fair benefit sharing and community or all the key stakeholders also get involved and benefited from the work. Next slide, please. So basically, the questions or I'm not going to show you a rosy picture and say everything is great, but I want to share some of the challenges we faced and how we overcame those challenges in our process. So this presentation on pests may be applicable for some other biodiversity related financing solutions as well. When Sri Lanka prioritized pests as one of the piloting financial instrument in 2019, many experts thought that we were dreaming and we were going ahead. We were trying to chase a very difficult, very impossible aim. But we started the journey and we found some early success with a mini hydropower company called Vidulanka. And it was the first ever pilot of payment for ecosystem services in Sri Lanka. IUCN was the intermediary providing the necessary technical guidance, and mini hydro power plant was supporting the upper catchment restoration work of their own power plant. So it was a kind of a classical PES. And of course, local communities were involved as the sellers. But due to the economic crisis Sri Lanka experienced and the COVID pandemic, we had to suspend the operations of our first pilot. And then only in 2023, with the support of Green Finance Institute, we restarted or we renewed our interest on this PES as we saw some of the private sector companies were willing to, be the buyers. So actually, then only we came across real challenges. At the first stage, one private company agreed, and it was very, very kind of a dream start. But when we tried to start it again, we found that there were several challenges, several hurdles that we had to overcome. So there were like some of the issues I have noted down. Some civil society organizations were questioning whether this is related to commodification of nature, or some private companies were trying to, they were questioning what are the benefits for investing on a public good, so that others also could benefit without any investments. So can we use the buyer? Can the buyers use PES for offsets? Because offset is a kind of a taboo word in Sri Lanka due to various other situations. So the political and social interest also had to be taken into consideration, not only the economic and financial considerations. So like this, and some people wanted to promote mandatory systems as well. So can we have a mandatory system, or is it a voluntary system? So all these questions we had to solve before going into the discussions with potential buyers and sellers. I'm not saying that we had 100% successful answers, but we are in the process of answering them. We are in the process of finding answers with other like-minded organizations, like-minded stakeholders. Next slide, please. The other problem was related to the governance. As Tom also mentioned, that most of our, the 5 lessons were also related to this governance mechanism, because there was a question about whether we need a dedicated policy or a governance law act related to payment for ecosystem services, or can we do away with the existing solutions? like environment policy, the provisions in the existing environment policy, provisions in the environment sensitive areas in Sri Lanka, climate change, private forestry sector master plan, etc. So the Minister of Environment took the lead, and they established a steering committee to discuss and lead on this the discussion related to payment for ecosystem services policies. So fortunately, we found the answer, and it is coming up. Of course, with the current situation, we are working with the existing laws and regulations, but in future there might be a possibility to amend certain laws and add pest related aspects also into it. Then came the capacity building issues, because intermediary or reliable standardized frameworks need to be there to ensure that the both buyers and sellers will not get any affected adversely. And the cost of intermediary was another issue, because the buyers were willing to pay the costs of the ecosystem service provision or the additionality, plus the social costs or social aspects related to it, but not the costs related to intermediary, because intermediary costs were very high due to economies of scale and all the other issues. So for that, to address that, we wanted to get the support of universities and local academic institutions, so that the intermediary support services could be made available to potential buyers and sellers without any problem. And of course, things were not easy, with many organizations want to promote payment for ecosystem services in parallel lines, because some were in favor of mandatory payments or setting up of a fund and making it a mandatory for the potential buyers to contribute towards that fund, rather than having a individual or voluntary kind of payments. So all these complex situations we had to navigate through and find out solutions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, I'm going to share two pilot solutions we are almost about to sign off. One is related to the tourism industry in Sri Lanka. We have a very interesting hiking track called Peco Trail. It is a private company owned or maintained tracking with 22 different stages, and we are working with one stage 6, and that particular stage going through a tea estate. We are discussing with the Peco Trail managers and the tea estate how to ensure that both Peco Trail, the tea estate and the communities living in the tea estate could benefit from the payment for ecosystem service. And the second one, if time permits, if I can have one more minute, the next slide, please. It is about kind of a classic one between, next slide, please. A mini hydro operated by one tea estate and the catchment area managed by Horana Plantation. So like in our pilot case, it was a catchment protection type of a initiative. Thank you very much. And if you have any additional questions, I would like to answer. Thank you for allowing me one more minute.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ramita.
Tom, sorry, can I interrupt 1 second? Sorry, it seems like we're having a bit of an issue with the interpretation. I'm told by some participants that we have interpreters in the English channel. So I would just wanted to ask the interpreters to move to the French channel if possible. Sorry. Over to you, Tom. Thank you.
No problem, Alexis. Thank you for that announcement, and thank you, Ramita, for the presentation. Fascinating to sort of get inside some of the policy, regulatory opportunities and barriers you're witnessing in Sri Lanka, particularly over the last few years, where it's been a very volatile time in Sri Lanka around some of the governance issues. As always, if you've got any questions for Ramita or any other speakers, put them in the chat. We've had quite a few coming in, so we will touch on those now. So we're going to move into the panel discussion and welcome back our speakers. And maybe what we can do is, if we take the slides down and we can just see everyone's face, that would be great. And what I'll try to do is I'll weave in questions that I've seen coming into the chat for our speakers. And really opportunity just to get some clarifications, further information on what you've heard, but also potentially come back to some of those lessons learned that I shared earlier. Maurizio, I want to start with you and just to throw a few sort of questions at you and weave in some of the questions I see coming in from the chat. Be really keen to understand more about engagement with investors. So without getting specific in terms of an actual investor, what kind of investors are you seeing invest in habitat banks, for example? I've seen in the US where there's been pension funds. Is that sort of the atypical kind of investor you see? Second question, and sorry, related to that investor question, there's a question in from the chat, which is, what mechanisms do you use to attract or negotiate with the investors in terms of getting them to invest in the habitat? What do you find actually works in terms of attracting that investment? Second question I have is around the mitigation hierarchy. Often when we hear presentations about mitigation banking, there's always some critique that these approaches may bypass the mitigation hierarchy. So, not sort of working on avoiding impacts, but going straight to offsetting. So it'd be great to get your observations from what you see on the ground in terms of the application of offsetting within the context of the mitigation hierarchy, for example. Do you see that it actually increases avoidance because the cost of the credits could be higher than the avoidance action? And then last question, Maurizio, sorry to pile these on you, but sort of on the voluntary market side, what's your observations and predictions there? We hear a lot about voluntary biodiversity markets at the moment. So be keen to get your sort of observations and predictions about, do you see that growing in the future? So first one about engagement with investors. What kind of investors? How do you entice them? Second one about the mitigation hierarchy. How do you make sure that that stays true? And then any observations or predictions around the voluntary biodiversity market?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I see there's a lot of questions to me, and feel free to contact me afterwards if we cannot answer everything. So investors. So we started 10 years ago with an investment from the IDB. They were, it's a traditional investment, like a development bank. They had a return in the investment, and that's how Habitat Banks just started. Now we've been diversifying those investors. So now we have also development banks. We have impact banking, so banks that are willing to invest in this type of projects. And also we work with several companies that are wanting to invest also as a way to have a financial return. Normally what we do with them is because, and I'm going to jump to the last question about the voluntary market, because the voluntary market, we see there's I mean, it's growing. We have clients, we have interest from different sectors and from different companies. However, we don't know if the market will develop into a concrete market, as for example, the carbon market has done, or as for example, the compliance market in Colombia has done. So with the investors in companies, we normally have a arrangement. If the Habitat Bank is not, would not give them the financial returns they're expecting, we are working with different banks to have like guarantees to pay for that investment, and also we can pay with biodiversity outcomes. So normally these investors are willing to put in the money, have a financial return, or have a biodiversity return instead. within a mechanism that includes a guarantee from another bank. So it's more or less that, but we are diversifying. So the voluntary market is growing. We expect that it will keep growing, but we need to understand what is the business case for companies in order to invest in this. Because right now, I think we've been concentrated a lot in the MRV, that is good, in the unit type, and that is also good. But we have been less, the ecosystem of biodiversity credit has been less attentive on creating the business case for companies in order to invest. We think that we have the MRV right. The ecosystem, not terrazos, but we've been talking a lot about this. The unit also, we have it right. But we need to concentrate and we need to get efforts in understanding what is a business case to nature. And the last question, mitigation hierarchy. Here in Colombia, we have, the law obligates companies to demonstrate how do they apply the mitigation hierarchy. So before buying the credits, the company has to demonstrate how they avoid it, how they restore the impacts, and the residual impacts are the ones that they are buying credits with. That will depend on each of the countries' legislation to call those investments offsets. Because in the voluntary part, we're not calling them offsets. They are not offsets. They are additional contributions to biodiversity in a biodiversity positive spectrum. So it depends. And when we call them offsets, they need to demonstrate that they comply with the mitigation hierarchy.
Yeah, maybe it goes without saying, but the effectiveness of habitat banking is really dependent on that well-established regulatory framework, right? In terms of that's the real underpinning of the success of the habitat bank.
Yeah, so for example, in Colombia, we see that there's about $1 billion or more dollars that haven't been allocated to biodiversity conservation and restoration, and habitat banks are unlocking those investments. So we now have a really clear business case for habitat banks in the compliance sector, where countries and legislations have that clear for all of the parties. And the voluntary part, we're still innovating and understanding the business case for companies in order to invest in biodiversity credits in the voluntary part. But the compliance part has been proved. One of our habitat banks is almost completely sold right now. It's about 700 hectares here in Colombia, and it's almost completely sold. And we have a bunch of other clients buying credits in the compliance part. So it's really important to have the correct policies in place in order for all the actors to know what they have to do, where to invest, and how to invest.
Excellent. Thank you, Mauricio. And I'll come back to you in a bit because there's a few questions about sort of monitoring, etc., which would be great for you to go into. And other panelists, if you want to add on to anything Mauricio has mentioned, please do so as well. But Gabriela, I wanted to come to you and again, put a few questions to you, hopefully not sort of overwhelming you. First of all, we had a question from the audience, which is asking if you could say a little bit more about the route towards the current structure that you shared on your second slide. How did that come together? And maybe to sort of help illustrate that, one question I had was, you mentioned the IFC and the GEF funding, which I think is concessional funding, isn't it? And could you just comment in a bit more detail about what that enables you to do in terms of attracting other investors, etc.? And then the last question I had is, you obviously have ambitions to scale and increasing available credit for producers. Be interesting what your position is now in terms of, as your credit facility grows, how the sort of the grant portion, the technical assistance portion of your work needs to grow at the same pace, if you like, and the risk of the credit growing beyond the capabilities of the technical assistance. So I'll leave it there for some initial questions for you to ponder and give us your response.
Thank you, Tom. So on the route, as I said, I always put the current structure because we are evolving in terms of bringing other actors to the structure. So Jeff has joined recently. And also about this route is also that we have been working on the structure, so how they are coupled together. And one example is the trench. The trench we is initiated with a single trench of investment in the credit vehicle, and then we created the senior and divided the mezzanine and subordinated trenches. So actually IFC has resources in the senior trench, so it's commercial capital, and also in the mezzanine trench, which is concessional. I think it's very important, perhaps, Tom. I think one aspect of having GEF, of having IFC, also IDB is a partner in the technical assistance facility, has a great role in terms of reputation, because everyone says, wow, when we show to other off-takers, like, oh, we managed to go through the process, 2 years of submitting, since submitting the first proposal to GEF to the end. So they know it's rigorous, the assessment that GEF, IFC, IDB do in their due diligence to work with us. I think this has a very important component. And the other is also the expertise that they bring. So I think that's very important. As I said, I mentioned the gender strategy from GEF, but also IFC helping us to enhance the environmental social risk management framework, the SMS from VERT, to tailor to these realities. So in the beginning, we actually used UEBT, the certification that Natura adopts for our social biodiversity supply chains, as one of the main safeguards instrument. But if we want to go to other supply chains that don't have UEBT certification, don't have the team from Natura applying the certification, involved in the implementation of the certification scheme, we need to do that. So I think there is also important role of bringing other resources, either to prepare the gender strategy, or the other part, actually, as I said, in terms of attracting other partners that they already feel there is reliability, there is a construction on that. So I think we keep evolving. As I said, on the current structure, we want to have other stakeholders, other off-takers involved. This has been a core issue. And getting to the last point that you mentioned on the TA facility is very important, as you said, because the credit is one barrier, but the other barriers are, multiple barriers, as I said, to expand or scale up social biodiversity supply chains and social biodiversity in general in Brazil. So we do need more structuring investments on the technical assistance facility to actually go to the next level of social bioeconomy. And I think also this, I just took note what Mauricio also said about short-term investment. We also wanted to tackle that with the mechanism, instead of investing in one project specifically. Natura alone is how do you build this platform of multi-stakeholder platform, and that you have ongoing investments and addressing the needs. I saw a question about monitoring, but I think I will leave this for the next round. And I also just want to touch base on the mosaic of solutions. And I think this is what we are saying, working with habitat banks with terraces is one example. The community where we are developing this pilot project, right, Mauricio, is also in the mechanism. So they are also accessing credit. They are also receiving financial management, capacity building. They are also involved in the gender strategy, and they are also part of our territorial advisory council. So it's very important, because you are bringing different instruments to achieve better environmental social performance in these territories. I ended there.
Great, thank you, Gabriel. We will come back to you. It's fascinating to hear, from the investors' side, how you're not just looking for money, but you're looking for other support options as well, strategic support, technical support. So I think that's a real key lessons learned, is not just attracting investors that give you the right kind of money, which is a difficult thing in itself, but can bring some added value as well to the initiative. Romita, I wanted to come to you, and starting off with a question I see in the chat here. Could you say a little bit more about sort of who initiated, owned, or drove the process that you described for PES in Sri Lanka? And then sort of a related question to that, perhaps, specifically with project developers, so on the ground sort of organizations who are driving these projects, what kind of capacity needs are you seeing from them, or technical assistance needs that they require? In a similar vein, we heard some from Gabriella of what they're experiencing with the Living Amazon mechanism.
Thank you, Tom. Initially, the projects were developed through actually the suggestions came from private sector as well, and Biofin project was proactively looking for opportunities and promoting the PES concepts, especially with the social outcomes included. So that was one, and PES was identified as one of the financial solutions in our biodiversity financing plan of 2019. So the government was also keen to promote PES. Actually, one indicator was that government agreed to provide around $9 million to one of the Green Climate Fund project as the government contribution of PES. That was in 2020. So there was a push from both government, public, and private developers for PES schemes. But the problem was that there was a issue of understanding the concept, and when it especially like PES and PES-like models, because most of the best case scenarios available for us were related to a fund and kind of a mandatory payment. So not many private sector organizations wanted to contributed towards a fund which may or may not directly lead to direct ecosystem benefits for them. So these were some of the challenges, and especially the technical aspects, the cost, because there are some intermediary organizations who are really capable, who are scientifically equipped to do the measurements and provide the support, but unfortunately the cost of their involvement is also very high compared to the transaction values, and most of the buyers are willing to pay that amount to the communities or the sellers directly rather than to an intermediary. So this type of issues are there, and we are trying to sort them out through the involvement of universities and other government agencies.
Great, thank you, Romita. And there was a question actually, as you hear about the Living Amazon mechanism and habitat banking, what's your sort of observations about their potential applicability in a country like Sri Lanka? So in the example of the Living Amazon mechanism, where there's economic activity around non-timber forest products, for example, and the opportunities there, maybe with tea in Sri Lanka, for example, and habitat banking as well. What's your sense from those kinds of models and their applicability in a country like Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think technically there won't be any problem, but we have to check the political willingness to accept and implement such things. Because as an example, we tried biodiversity credit a couple of years back, but then we found out that the government has committed all our carbon credits as our commitment to the Paris Agreement, and there can't be any more commitments or any more work related to biodiversity credit, which has a carbon credit component. So I think the technically there won't be any problem, but most of the time our issue is related to the political willingness, political decisions, and that needs to be checked with the government. Tom.
Great, no, thank you. And there's a question coming in the chat. Is there a link available on the Ecotourism PES in Sri Lanka? This is actually part of the Revenues for Nature project, so we will be publishing the Sri Lanka PES experience probably around May time next year, so do look out for that. All right, I wanted to circle back to the monitoring issue because we had a few questions coming in there, so particularly Maurizio and Gabriella, just to bring you in. Maybe Maurizio, just generally, because there was a few monitoring questions for you, could you just talk through sort of the monitoring process in terms of the transparency, et cetera, and the biodiversity unit credits, you know, what you go through? And then I'll come to you after that, Gabriella.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yes, so as in any of these projects, what we do first is that we create like biodiversity indicators that will depend on the ecosystem. So we have various type of indicators, and we have a pool of indicators that will depend, of course, on the ecosystem, based on land cover, for example. So or based on, for example, biodiversity indicators in terms of composition, in terms of function, and in terms of richness. The specific indicators will depend on the outcomes that we want to achieve, if the project is voluntary or if the project will be more for the compliance, because we will have to engage also with environmental agencies, and they also have different types of indicators. So that's the first indicators and the methodology that we're gonna follow. Then we create a baseline to create like a photography or of where the project is right now in those indicators. And then what we do is that we develop what we call a biodiversity release schedule. So a biodiversity credit release schedule. That means that we'll have certain milestones, both ecological milestones and management milestones, that we will have to reach in the term of the project. So in the first 10, 15 years of the project, we will have to reach those milestones. Those milestones will be justified. So the accomplishments of those milestones will be justified by the biodiversity indicators that we develop in the first place. And when we achieve those milestones, there will be a auditor that right now we're working with KPMG that will come in, that will verify those results, and that will allow us to emit those credits to the market as a payment for result mechanism. All of these transactions and all of this monitoring and all of this like information databases, etc., are safeguard in the registry platform. So they have this role of safeguarding all the information, all the monitoring, all the baseline, all the checking of the biodiversity and management milestones and ecological milestones. So all this is in the registry. It cannot be modified in time, and all is allocated to this blocks of information that is the blockchain. So we have I send in the chat our protocol. Though there we have examples of indicators, of our baskets of indicators, and also examples on how do we do this management in ecological milestones in the credit release schedule. So you can go in there and have a throughout read. And if you have any questions, we are super available to answer them through email or through WhatsApp.
Excellent. Thank you, Maurizio. Appreciate you going through that in quite a concise way, but more information as well in the link. Thank you for sharing that. And Gabriella, a similar question coming in for you in terms of how do you monitor the biodiversity impacts for the living Amazon mechanism?
Yes. So our focus in terms of environmental performance is the coverage area of protected forests, either conserved or restored. Not restored with resources from the mechanism, but actually that we are financing a cooperative that works, for example, with cocoa from restored areas. So this is our key indicator in terms of environmental performance. And one important indicator that we developed specifically for the mechanism is really to track the maturity level of these cooperatives and associations. So they are community business, as I said, and we just collected now the baseline started, and we want to monitor the long term, how they are evolving, and also to inform what kind of needs, again, on the technical assistance that we need to work with them. So do they have enough participation from women in their board position, how it's evolving over time, if they had access to other mechanisms. So we really want to work on this maturity level, and it's an idea that came from Fumbio, that they also had an instrument that they worked with maturity level with protected areas, and we adapted that to the mechanism. So this is one of the core features. But we have other instruments, as Mauricio said here, about monitoring biodiversity and others. So we also have a social progress index that we use for the communities from Natura. And this is actually tracking environmental and social performance. So the ones which are part of the mechanism, we are going to see how this evolve over time. But for the mechanism, we are trying to keep it simple, but at the same time robust, to also be able to replicate when we have other supply chains actually joining. And I just wanted to mention something else on the structure, because I remembered later as well on the current structure. Today, we are financing annual crops, but in the future, we also want to have other solutions for financing. So perhaps in the future, we can consider also payment for environmental service. And also, which is a very important topic recently in Brazil and worldwide as well, restoration. So we also want to create. So we started, and this is the current structure, is starting with the easiest, so to say, which is annual crops to model. But we also want to model for other kinds of schemes that are also building on our view of the mechanism of strengthening social bioeconomy.
Great, thank you, Gabriela. One last question from me, which is, I think will cover off all the questions we've received, and then I'll quickly go to Taos, who has their hand up for the last question. There's a question coming in about, do the communities establish their own company? How much income do they generate? I mean, you're talking about cooperatives, right? Maybe you can give us a sense of the size of the cooperatives that you're engaging with.
Yes, and I think that's a very good question. Most of them also relates to biodiversity. Most of them, they are plant extractivists, which basically actually is conserved forest where they collect the Brazil nuts and so on. So this also gives you an idea that it's important for them to have biodiversity, even though we're not looking in detail into that. And most of them, they are small cooperatives and small, so producers cooperatives. So we have the plant extractivists. In Brazil, there is a long tradition of rubber extraction, which is one of the stewards of this movement. And we have actually one of these person sitting on the board. So they are small. I think sometimes I don't have the figures. In Natura, we work with 46 cooperatives, mostly in Brazil, but also in Colombia and Peru and Ecuador. And you can range from perhaps 50 families to a couple of hundreds. I don't know, Maurice, perhaps you know, Irituia, how many? Probably more than I do. But basically they are small. And one thing that I wanted to say on that, which is a very good question, Natura also works, as I said, we have been doing a lot of work. There is a dedicated area in the procurement department to that. So they help to create sometimes the cooperatives when they need actually to have the legal structure, or to advance if it's an association and moves to being the cooperative. But one part that I wanted to mention, so this has been done over the years by Natura, but in this project that we have with the youth now, which is an 8-month capacity building program, they are actually being trained by an organization, an NGO in the Amazon, which is very much knowledgeable of how to establish cooperatives and how to establish associations, but that they understand how you operate, how you run a cooperative, how you run an association. with regenerative criteria from the UBT certification. So there is a very important aspect that's not only cooperativism or associativism for social biodiversity, but sustainability, it's embedded in the whole program, so they can continue doing this work and promoting better environmental social performance.
Great, thank you, Gabriela. And we're at time. Been a super rich discussion. Really appreciate our speakers. So thank you, Ramita, thank you, Maurizio, and thank you, Gabriela. There are some useful links in the chat. We've published the Living Amazon Mechanism as a guidebook. We've also got Habitat Banking in Colombia published as a guidebook. You'll find the links in the chat, and coming soon, PES schemes in Sri Lanka, probably around May time. All right, with that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Katie, who's going to sort of preview 2026 Revenues for Nature and what's in store. Katie, over to you.
Super, thanks so much, Tom. If we can have the slides back, that would be great. But really, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the community of practice. So if we go to the next slide. So similar to the webinars and activities we've delivered this year with the partnership with UNDP, BioFin, and GFI, and UNFFI, the community of practice for 2026 aims to continue to accelerate the mobilization of this public and private sector finance for nature in support of Target 19 of the GBF, and really to facilitate the global collaboration between governments, finance institutions, businesses, and project developers to share, replicate, and scale high integrity revenue models for nature, such as those we've shared today, and really to enhance capacity of these stakeholders in design, structuring, policy, and regulatory environments needed for revenue generating nature models, and also to influence enabling policy or regulatory frameworks in the participating countries to help remove barriers and improve incentives for private investment in nature. So if we go to the next slide, next year we'll really focus on 3 key work streams, really fostering targeted dialogues with stakeholders to facilitate this further learning and capacity building, and for mobilizing the scaling and replicating of these proven revenue models for nature. So the dialogues will build understanding of the barriers and challenges to these mechanisms, as well as collective ways to implement these by fostering cross-stakeholder partnerships. So with this 2026 agenda, we aim to focus on the following 3 work streams. So compliance and habitat banking models. So this is biodiversity offsets and mitigation banking, national compliance frameworks and regulatory mechanisms. And here we invite stakeholders, including governments, regulators, developers, MDBs, and legal experts. We'll then also focus on nature-related financial instruments. So this can be green and blue sustainability-linked bonds, use of proceeds linked to revenues for nature models mentioned here, as well as corporate and sovereign bonds. And stakeholders who may be interested in these are banks, DFIs, institutional investors, and ministries of finance as well. And finally, we have these collection action supply chain models similar to the LAM, and those interested could be producer associations and cooperatives, jurisdictional partnerships, nature positive sourcing models. So stakeholders, including corporates, agri-co-ops, and project developers and NGOs. So if you'd like to engage in any of these streams, please do make sure to flag your interest in the closing form after this webinar has ended, and we will share more information on getting engaged in these further, in furthering your learning and collaboration in this space as a follow-up to this webinar. With that, Tom, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And just sort of what's coming up in the immediate future, we've mentioned a few of these guidebooks. We have one to be published hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so on revenue models and financing mechanisms for wildlife conservation. So do look out for that on the Revenues for Nature website. If you're part of the community of practice, you will get an email when that comes out. And as I already mentioned earlier, we'll have the Sri Lanka PES guidebook in around May. And then before that, we will have a guidebook dedicated to marine revenue models. That should be out in probably January, February as well. So look, hopefully we've given you some inspiration today. We've got such a rich body of information that we've gathered through Revenues for Nature in the case studies, the guidebooks, some of the partners that we are working with. And we've only really just scratched the surface in terms of some of those lessons learned and really what to look out for next year as we aim to support many of our partners in scaling and replicating the models that you heard about today. So we'll leave it there. We will share the recording and the slides with you shortly. Do sign up to the community of practice if you have not already. That's just the best way to keep in touch with everything that's going on in Revenues for Nature. And just thank you for your time. Thank you again to our speakers, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Ciao.